ENGN Preview Series Episode 4, Tradewars Homeworld, the Exterra Edition with lead developer Joseph Pilkus. Yo, my peoples, what's up? We are back with the preview series. We've had a really great response to these previews that we do for Kickstarters and for pre-orders and all that kind of stuff. So we're just going to keep on going. I put the call out to BGG and I had a bite. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the world, or our audience anyway, to the lead developer and the designer of the solo AI for the current Kickstarter, Tradewars Homeworld, the Exterra Edition, Joseph Pilkus. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody.
All right. So,
This is great.
so the Kickstarter is in the last week, so we wanted to get this episode out to let people know that the Kickstarter is running. A lot of one-player guild people know that it's running, but, more people, if you get one more backer out of it, then it's always worth it, right?
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. Cool. And it was actually the one-player guild. If I had to give anybody thanks, there's a couple of people, most notably Chris, with whom I've worked the past couple of years on this game. And then for my first published game, Tau Ceti, we went with the same publisher, which was my co-designer out of Outer Limit Games, Mike and Stan Strickland. And the one-player guild, they were extremely vocal, both over at BGG and many of the backers, that they would like to see an AI. And I thought, okay, this would be a fun challenge.
All right. Yeah. Butter up our audience. That's great. Okay, so we're just into the introduction. So you are a designer. I think that's your first game was Tau Ceti?
Yeah, so the first game that where I guess I get credit as a co-designer was Tau Ceti, which is the only. I got to caveat this because I spoke with friends of ours now from Centauri Saga.
Yes.
Who have a scenario-based one. So we're the only non-scenario-based 4X cooperative space game.
That is a mouthful.
Yeah, right. So there are tons of competitive space games that are 4X, but ours is the only one that's cooperative. And that was a real labor of love, which came kind of strangely to me because it was something I backed originally. It didn't fund, and I joked with Mike several months later saying, the best thing that could have happened to me in the game was it didn't fund, because I had an opportunity to kind of get under the hood and really do a lot of work with that game and worked with Mike and Stan, and it showed when it relaunched. So we're really pleased about that.
And this is Outer Limit Games?
This is Outer Limit Games, father and son team out of the Tampa, Florida area. Really good guys. Had a chance to work with them very closely with the game, and then in person we were at Origins last year. We all worked the booth. They were there for at least a day or so before me, and then we worked the booth Friday, Saturday, and into Sunday. For folks to pre-order the game and have a chance to sit down with folks, fellow podcasters like yourself, Brandon Dahl from Brawling Brothers. Had a chance to play for a couple of rounds. So that was exciting. We're heading out this year. This time I'm not working at the booth. I'll actually play games for several days. I'm taking my daughter with me as well. It'll be post-graduation from high school, so it'll be kind of cool.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so actually, let's get into Tradewars. So then we'll kind of get all that stuff in the way, and I'm sure that we're bringing a lot of your other expertise as we kind of talk about this. But the people, we need to feed the beast, and we need to get the word about Tradewars out there. Sure. So let's just start from the beginning. Let's pretend that our audience doesn't know a lot about this game. Tell us a little bit about what they're going to be getting if they pledge.
So with the pledge, we're going to get right out of the box, you're going to get a 1 to 4 player game. And that has a bit of history to it as well. Chris and I originally had planned a game for about $25 to $30 in which it would be you'd have a deck of cards that you could play, kind of like Magic the Gathering, where you would have your deck, other people would have their boxes, and then you'd come together to play, the Space Wars or the other scenarios. And as we went on, we really wanted to provide out of the box a multiplayer as well as a solo experience, and that's obviously important to this particular podcast. But we really wanted to have as many cards as possible in the game right from the get-go at a reasonable cost. And how we did that, again, partnering with Outer Limit Games, they have a lot of really good contacts from having the first successful Kickstarter. So the first thing is, right out of the box, you're going to have one to four player game, asymmetric factions, in which you'll have an opportunity to play 3 different scenarios, one solo and the other 2 multiplayer, in which you're either trying to blast each other's ships out of the space lanes and defeat their homeworlds, or a real trade war in which you're trying to capture and garner as many credits as possible for your homeworld by banking that money in your treasury.
So then in terms of basic gameplay, is it like Magic the Gathering in space?
So I guess the single biggest difference is with Magic the Gathering, Jason, you're going to assemble your deck however you want to assemble your deck. I'm going to assemble mine, and we're going to meet on the battlefield. And I don't know what you have until you start presenting them. Whereas in our game, we all have a commonality among the various starships and weapons. How we employ them will be fundamentally different. And I think that's probably the single biggest thing, single biggest difference. Although there are other differences for people who sit down and play those. So again, Magic the Gathering is not so much a deck builder as a deck built. If I can be so bold. So I think that's the other difference, right? So right out of the gate, you're going to start with a handful of cards that are exactly the same as everybody else at the table. How you choose to employ them, and I think more along the lines of maybe a Thunderstone or a Dominion or Ascension for people who have played those games.
Right.
And then from there, it radically changes, because very often in any of those games, it's very tactical. And I'll be very specific in the use of my language. Tactical in the sense that you have 5 cards in your hand, and you can only do whatever you can with those 5 cards. And that may be drawing more cards from your hand, but at some point that's going to end. And then everything goes into the discard pile. Whereas in our game, you actually have the opportunity from a more long-term strategic point of view. You can actually retain cards after the buy phase. So you could have cards for multiple rounds. You may want to hold on to a tactics card. You may have the very starship or weapon or crew that you want to employ the next or the very next round after that. And you can hold on to that, which makes that very, very different. Also, the ability to combine cards. I'll look at a game like Dominion. In Dominion, you can play the militia card. It's a one-time shot against everybody at the table. Whereas with Tradewars, you're going to configure starships with the starship, the weapon, and the crew that you're going to eventually, launch into your space lane, and that's going to remain there. And you're going to be able to employ that to attack or defend your homeworld, and it only goes into the discard pile if defeated. So that's very different from some of these other games. Also, with some of the other deck builders out there, you have a common marketplace in which everybody has access to the same types of stuff that are sitting on top. And once one of those piles is exhausted, you no longer have an access to it. Whereas with Tradewars, everybody's going to have their own tableau in front of them in which they'll have a research facility, they'll have a starship, shipyard, etc. So you're buying from your own market. So there's not that same difficulty for scant resources, in front of you.
So I definitely wanted to hit that point that this game, if I had to kind of elaborate one major difference between this game and a lot of the other deck builders versus type games, this game has a lot of elements of strategy. We'll get to that in a second. I did want to take a step back and ask you about the name of the game itself. It's Tradewars Homeworld, the Exterra Edition. That is a mouthful.
Yeah, it really is. One of the things that Chris wanted to do from very early on, I guess, bifurcated along 2 lines of thought. One was the Exterra part, right? So these are the Terrans that have left, And in time, we want to introduce other alien races and provide other asymmetric factions to the game, which would be very exciting. The other part of it too is he didn't want to go down the line of some games, and maybe Magic the Gathering falls into this more than anything else, where you're constantly buying newer and newer either blister packs or boxes or anything else, and you never have a complete set. We wanted folks to have a complete set, and they didn't feel compelled that they had to buy more stuff moving forward. If it interests them and it excites them, yeah, by all means. But we wanted to be able to find, Tradewars, that's a game you're going to play again and again and again simply because of the replayability of it. The other line of thought, in addition to the Exterra piece, was we're certainly going to encourage, kind of from an open license standpoint, we want those individuals, our backers today, and the folks who buy it 5-10 years from now. Keep in contact with us. They may have some fantastic ideas that maybe we can bring to fruition with the artist. If you've seen the art, it's very difficult for me to be at all objective. I think it's some of the best art out there, which makes it very, very attractive. And we would love to be able to produce some of the ideas that other folks might have in the future and bring that to life as well. So,
right. Okay. So right now it's Tradewars Homeworld, but then another new set could come in, which is Tradewars Mercury Protocol or whatever. I think I stole that from somewhere.
I like that. Yes, right.
I probably stole it. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then within that family of games, I almost think of like Pathfinder, the adventure card game. So like Pathfinder, Skulls and Shackles, blah, 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 blah. Like there's like a bunch of stuff within that series. And then the next series, Pathfinder, whatever the other series is. So like you envision this as like not only a bunch of editions of the game, a bunch of like different factions, but like whole different sets. And there's factions within the set. So this is like the beginning. This is like that scout ship.
This is really the foundational piece upon which everything else will build upon. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
All right. So if you potential backers, if you buy into this, you might be buying into something that lasts a good long time. Get a lot of gameplay out of it.
Yeah, that's the idea. Absolutely.
All right, so let's get back to the what we talked about before with like the difference between strategy and tactics.
Yes.
That's not a distinction that a lot of people get. I see that a lot in my group. It's like, okay, I'm doing strategy now. Well, I'm also doing tactics. It's the same thing. What you're talking about is very specific, where in terms of like tactics is kind of that in the moment, move by move, action reaction stuff, and then strategy is more of your long term approach. I'm getting that right?
Yes, you absolutely. Some of that stems from now 2 decades in the Air Force, but being drummed into my head the difference between tactics and strategy. Right. But in a game like this, we certainly want people to have that feeling that they can make longer term decisions. For as many times as I've sat down to play a game like Thunderstone or Dominion, you're really in the moment every moment, as opposed to because I can't, if you'll pardon the expression, I can't bank on getting that merchant or that village. I know they're there because I purchased them and they're in my discard pile and I'll see them again. But for those of you who have played Dominion, how many times have you gotten caught with 2 moats in your hand but nobody plays militia? Or worse yet, somebody plays militia and the 3 moats you've purchased are in your discard pile. So,
or if you're playing Ascension and you built your deck towards military and there are no militaries in the river in the middle.
Right,
or there's no monsters to defeat, yeah.
Yeah, so we really wanted to have kind of a schema in which, when you purchase things, you're purchasing them for the long haul. And then taking a page from these other games that over time you can actually shed those cards which are of no use to you anymore. Getting down to that thinning. Major Brown, another gentleman by the name of Jason, Army guy, he did a thread recently on BGG that talks about that very thing. There's only a couple really good strategies in terms of how do you deal with deck builders? Do you buy everything and have access to everything, or do you thin it down and keep it really light and tight and you have access to the very best things in your hand. No way is better. It really depends on how you can employ them. So.
Okay. So then, so a couple things. So I think the game that came up for me in terms of the look of the game and the gameplay is Star Realms. I think a lot of people are going to look at this game and maybe say, I have Star Realms, I have the app, I have the cards, I have Colony Wars, I have all this stuff. Why should I invest in this second thing, right? So, I mean, I think you've kind of elaborated what the difference is between Star Realms. Like, Star Realms is very tactical. This is very strategic. But in terms of like a bigger picture thing, are you is your company targeting that Star Realms audience? Like, is that something that, do you want to like get in there specifically people who are playing Star Realms and say, okay, this is something else you can buy and it adds this thing? I mean, is that something that's a conscious decision or what?
Yeah, so I think when we looked at games like Star Realms, and I've played Hero Realms. So bear in mind, I come from a role-playing game background as well as war games. But I'll pick on the role-playing games for a second. Something that, let's say, Hero Realms does, and maybe to a lesser extent Star Realms, is you're distilling what might take several months in a campaign down to card flips. Okay,
right.
For something like Hero Realms, where you're trying to deduct a number of hit points from the big, the big bad guy. With Hero Realms and Star Realms, very fast paced. The difference, I think, is there are no scenarios, and to my knowledge at least, I don't think there are any plans for scenarios. There's lots of really great cards, and I think the interplay between and among the cards is very exciting. But I think ours is twofold. One, the level of entry we hope is going to be a little bit easier for folks. We're not so much targeting Star Realms individuals as much as, hey, if you like Star Realms, you might really enjoy ours because we're going to have scenarios in which you could play one, or like I said, myriad ones that we're going to develop over time, and you're not locked into just battling one another time and time again. So that's one aspect. The other part is, we'd really like to invite our game into family homes where maybe they've never had a deck builder before, and picking up a card that has 17 different icons on it may not be attractive to them. It may be the barrier to entry may simply be too high. So we wanted something that was accessible, but also gave a different feel as opposed to playing the same game the same way every time. And I'll even pick on a game that doesn't even fit in the kind of the deck builder, but something like Twilight Imperium, where that game changes in a lot of ways simply because maybe the political cards that are used and the factions that are introduced in a way fundamentally different than some other games where you have the same faction time and time again, like a Eclipse or something like that. And I'm painting a very broad brush on these. But I think that's probably the thing. I would say accessibility would be a whole lot easier for folks. And then
to that point, I apologize for interrupting, but I just thought of this.
Yeah.
As I was playing, so I downloaded the print and play. So if you go to the Kickstarter, you go down, there's a faction that you can print, and you can print the solo scenario, which we'll get to in a second. So I was going through that, and it struck me that the cards that you buy, so like we've all played deck builders. You get your market, and the cards go into your discard pile. Those cards don't actually have text on them. They're either a ship or a weapon or something like that. When you play Star Realms, or you play Ascension, or you play some of these other games, every card has text. And if you're just introducing somebody new to that game, they're sitting there, they're reading it, or you're explaining it to them, and you're basically getting to the point where you're playing for them because you know all the cards. This game, all the text is on the player powers. It's on the faction, and it's on the different options that you can do at the beginning of the turn. I think that is pretty cool because it goes to that accessibility thing where once you figure out what those basic options are, then you can play. You're not going to get surprised, halfway into your fourth game with a new card that you didn't see, and you have to sit there and read it and all that kind of stuff. You can really get going pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too is we wanted to have accessibility for both gamers, hardcore gamers that play these, as well as the new person. And the new person's not going to, feel as though they're just out of their depth, or they're going to get absolutely slaughtered. So any game with a significant number of cards, and I'll point to two games that are very high on Board Game Geek's list, and I've tried them and they're fine, but these are not games I would necessarily own. Would be Through the Ages and Terraforming Mars, both very, very good games, and I understand the attraction to both. However, it's both of those games, by my estimation, they suffer from the fact that if someone has a dozen more games than you, they're almost always going to win.
You're going to get murdered.
They're going to get, yeah. I mean, and I've played only a handful of both of those. And again, I guess I speak to the barrier to entry. If I've only seen 20, 30, or 40 of the cards versus someone who has seen all of them, I know it's out there. I know it synergizes well. And you really can see that at the end of the game. If you look at something like Terraforming Mars, all of you might be around 34, 35, 36 at the end of the game until you take the final tally. And then the guy who wins is at 90.
Right.
And you're at 50-some. Which can be discouraging and a bit disheartening. And we really wanted people to pick up the game, play the game, and have a chance of winning. Even if it's your first time playing. And because that was important to me, especially for folks who have never played a deck builder before.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So speaking of equalizing, right?
Yes.
You do have, and I really wanted to ask about this because it is, to my mind, one of the only deck builders that I've seen that has dice. And the dice work in a very specific way. So you mentioned before that you lay your ships out, your ships have the weapons and the crew and everything, and then there's like a separate phase, like you can initiate with an action, say, okay, combat, I'm going to attack your ship, or I'm going to attack your homeworld, or whatever.
Yes,
correct. And that, it isn't necessarily resolved with the dice, but each side rolls a d6, and whoever rolls higher on the d6, that kind of says, okay, the attack is successful, the attack is not successful, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it is an opposed d6 die roll, which on the face of it is like, what?
Right.
A strategy game where I'm rolling opposed d6? How could you?
How could you do that? That's so swingy. And you're absolutely right, because I think if the narrative ended there, you would see a lot of folks kind of shrug and say, "What are they doing?"
It's like, that was lame.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it doesn't. So of course you have your weapon value or firepower against the crew or resistance, and if one is equal to or higher than the other, the ship is destroyed. But we also have a ton of different types of tactics cards, which change everything from defense values, resistance, initiative. So until such time as that combat is drawn, if somebody's sitting across from you and they have tactics cards in your hand, you have no idea what they're throwing at you. So even if you were to throw, a 5 to my 2 on the dice, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win. Coupled with the fact that if we actually roll, or the results end up that it's exactly the same result, right? So if you were to roll a 4, and through the use of tactics cards, or simply the roll of 4, it's an immediate counterattack. So you're always going in there, with the chance of a counterattack, all things being equal. So there is some reticence on the part of maybe attacking when your own ship could be destroyed, even if you have the firepower to destroy one of my ships. Mm-hmm. So from very early on, the tactics cards were those things that added, in addition to the dice, what I've long studied, the fog and friction of war. One of the things going back to my wargaming days, there's nothing all that fun or exciting about going into combat, and I know it's a fait accompli, that I know that by you playing that card, you've destroyed something. Mm-hmm. There's no fun in that for me. So we wanted to have the fun factor, and we've already had some of my playtest groups around the country, DC, Pennsylvania, Florida. On more than one occasion, some of the comments have been such that, Yeah, the die roll. Nick was standing up, rolling and screaming, whatever, getting the attention of the entire the game store because everything hinged on that combat. I'm not going to have that if I know, going back 40 years ago to when I started playing chess. If you move a certain thing and bishop takes knight, okay, yeah, you've taken the piece, but it wasn't really that exciting. It's not as exciting as a die roll and a series of card plays that destroys your ship. So we wanted to have the excitement value as well, and not just simply, oh, your 4 beats my 3.
And but in a way that's mitigating and tactics, because I think like modern game design, like the older war games, it was it, like you just rolled and it did whatever. I think modern games have developed to the point where there's a lot of mitigation, like there's re-rolls and there's add plus, add minus, I go first, you go first. So this game does that through the tactics cards. So if you're attacking another player who has 3 tactic cards in their hand, then that's a different thing than someone who just neglected it and it's like, okay, I know what I'm going to get out of this.
That's exactly right. Now, surprisingly, as I work on it with a number of war game developers, that area hasn't changed much. There are still die rolls and checking out various matrices to see what the results are. So that has not. Those ideas of board game design have not exactly moved into the board game realm. But you're right. In modern board game design, everything from something like Stefan Feld's Castles of Burgundy, a very simple game with dice in it, but dice that can be mitigated through the use of the workers. Fabulously simple mechanic to take away the randomness of dice,
but to still keep that fog of war element that still
absolutely
gets you that, so you're trying to achieve that balance, which is that's, as long as that balance is kind of in sight where there is tactics but there's strategy, but there's also kind of that pop that you want, like that's what you're going for, and that's eventually
exactly it.
The game is going to be the best when it has that sense of strategy and that sense of like pop and whatever it is.
Yes.
All right, great. So I think that does we kind of covered the game itself. Let's talk some solo.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So
have you? Yes. Yeah. So have you seen the Derelict? Have you seen the?
I have played the Derelict.
You have played the Derelict. Okay. So what did you think? You don't let me ask.
All right. Let's turn this around. You can interview me.
That's it.
Okay. So it definitely, whenever I look at a solo mode, excuse me, it definitely sticks out that this solo mode was designed kind of after most of the core concepts of the game were set in. Like you can kind of always tell when when a game has a baked in solo, or if a game kind of has it afterwards. This one definitely has a sense of like, okay, the game was developed. It's a head versus head thing, and then this Derelict is kind of a representative. Just for people who don't know, the Derelict is a ship with it's a big ship with a lot of health, and it just kind of floats there like this big, Leviathan floating in the sky, and you have to build yourself up to attack this thing. And round by round, there's actually a D10, right, that gets rolled, and then the D10 there's a list, and it depends on if you roll a 7, it attacks your ships. If you roll a 4, it attacks your homeworld, and blah blah blah. So then. It definitely stuck out that this was kind of attached to it, but it definitely was more than this is here just to, just for there to be a one player, or this is here just to learn the game. So that's like the lowest bar for a solo mode is,
sure.
You could learn the game with this and then move on to whatever. Yep. So this game, when in my experience, I definitely was a little bit more than that, where I definitely learned a lot about the game, kind of, and learning about my faction and stuff. But there was definite challenge. Like I think I played like 4 or 5 games, and sometimes Derelict won, sometimes sometimes I smashed Derelict to pieces, and it really came down to that die roll. So I think On a personal gamer level, I don't love a lot of die rolls, kind of determining whether I win or lose. I like to have that heavy mitigation. With derelict, it's basically, if you get hosed with the D10, there's nothing you can do. But I definitely do think that it was pretty challenging. It definitely kind of had me configure my strat. So I'll give you an example. I had a game where I had 3 ships. I'm feeling really good, and in this game, like 3 or 4 ships is a lot. Like that's your full armada. Yeah. And then a certain die gets rolled, the derelict just wipes them all out. It's like, what was that? I was ready to win.
That can be disheartening. Yeah.
So now I could see players kind of looking at that, going, "Oh no," and then I could see some players going, "Oh wow, now I'm gonna redo my strat and get back into it." So I at least on a level of a solo that works and a solo that can teach you the game, but that also presents a challenge that you will want to play this after you learn the game. Then yeah, I think the derelict was pretty effective.
Good. No, that's good to hear, because when I first sat down with Chris reached out to me several years ago on Board Game Designers Forum. I was out there. Anytime people had rules, I'd be more than happy to read them and edit them. And he reached out and asked if I would read his rules. And I liked it. And I told him, I said, look, I got to tell you, I'm not the deck builder guy. There are other things I do, but that's not an area that I'm particularly adept at. But I'm fascinated by the genre. He sent me the box that he had, prototype. And Jason, when I tell you, I played the derelict about 35 times that first week, just because it was so addictive. You wanted to win, and even if you won, you felt like, okay, I want to do it again. And part of it was playtest. And for your listeners who have done playtesting isn't playing.
Right.
Because playing is enjoyable. Right. And not that playtesting isn't, but playtesting is a lot of note-taking, and it's a lot of math, and it's a lot of trying to figure out what works and what should be shed. And I would say of the playtests I did as we moved forward with the especially with the derelict, there were some things that we added vis-a-vis the roles, because one of the things that we found very early on were that many of the roles were simply nerfed in the derelict, and we wanted to bring them back. We wanted to make sure that they could shine as much in the solo as they do in a multiplayer experience. So I have to say, I'm obviously biased towards it, but I have thoroughly enjoyed the derelict probably over 100 times now in the last couple of years, just simply because it's one that gets to the table. And I don't know about your particular games of it, but mine lasted anywhere from 25 to 35 minutes.
Yeah, they're quick. Mm-hmm.
They're quick, exactly. So again, it's not a huge brain burn, but you do have to think, what's the best thing I can do right now? Is it opening up another space lane, or should I get another ship out there? Because this thing is a ticking time bomb above your homeworld.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there might be a little bit too much of the random element with the D10, but that's I think that's a playstyle thing. I think the design-wise, it's solid, and people will have fun with it. So that's not the only. I think the game is shipping with the derelict, but there's more solo to come, right?
There's definitely more solo to come. So one of the things that I've been working on for the past couple of weeks is the AI, because I think that's important.
And you are a frequent poster over at Morton Peterson's blog, which, by the way, for solo people, we're actually going to talk about this over the next couple of episodes. But Morton Peterson, he is the president of the Automa Factory company. He makes the solo mode for Scythe and for Viticulture. He runs a blog which is called Thematic Solitaires for the Spare Time Challenged, which is fabulous.
It really is.
It's a fabulous post. In fact, Joseph has been invited to write his own guest post, which will be coming up pretty soon. So we're definitely looking forward to that. So is there anything else about Tradewars that we haven't covered that you'd like the general public to know?
Like I said, we really want to hear from the backers and the folks who have an interest in this particular genre, and especially from the solo community, because your ideas can be a reality. I want to take some of the best ideas out there. So again, please keep in touch with us. If you're out there already, hit the comment section, hit me up. I don't know, Jason, I don't know if you'd be more than happy to pass along my info to the listeners.
Oh, sure. You are the professor on BGG.
I'm the professor on BGG. At any time, I probably get not that many. I'm not like Jason, not that popular, but 15 or 20 emails a week. So it's but it's nice. I love hearing from folks and hearing their ideas. So that's the single biggest thing is we love to communicate with the folks and hear what they have to say. So thank you.
Cool. So so the Kickstarter has a little bit of time left. You can mosey on over there and take a look. This has been really, really great. Thank you for sharing your insights, not just about the game, but about solo design in general. I'm sure this would not be the only time that you'll be on the podcast. So
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Jason.
All right, so this has been the ENGN Preview Series, Episode 4, Tradewars Homeworld, the Exterra Edition. Like I said, it is still on Kickstarter. Hopefully you've got enough information where you can make an informed decision about whether you want to back this or not. So on behalf of Anthony, who will be back with our regular episode, this is Jason saying later, everybody.